A cruel millionaire lives in isolation, paralyzed from the waist down and consumed by bitterness, until a poor 8-year-old boy appears claiming he can heal him, not with science, but with words. The sun rose over the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the contours of Aspen Heights' most imposing estate in gold. Crystal Manor, as it was known by the local residents, did not receive its name only from the immense stained glass windows that adorned its facade, but also from the crystalline coldness that emanated from its sole inhabitant. Augustus Barnes, 58, was the owner of the largest network of private hospitals in the United States. His luxury clinics served celebrities, politicians, and entrepreneurs willing to pay fortunes for exclusive treatments. Ironically, the man who had built an empire dedicated to healing had been confined to a wheelchair for 5 years, following an accident in his private helicopter. "Incompetence!" Augustus shouted, watching from the window as his gardener stepped on a small area of newly planted grass. "Mrs. Martha, call that imbecile here immediately!" The housekeeper, a 60-year-old woman who had endured her employer's temper tantrums for over 2 decades, sighed deeply before answering the call. Minutes later, Mr. Josiah, the 67-year-old gardener who had been tending the gardens for 15 years, stood before Augustus, his straw hat trembling in his hands. "Did you send for me?" Augustus spun his electric wheelchair, staring at the man with cold eyes. 15 years here and you still haven't learned to respect my garden." "You're fired." "But Mr. Barnes, it was just a misstep. I'm not interested." "I want you out of here in an hour. Mrs. Martha will arrange your entitlements, though you don't deserve them." Alone again in his office, Augustus contemplated the diplomas and certificates that covered an entire wall. There were the names of the world's greatest specialists in spinal cord injuries. Neurologists from Harvard, surgeons from Switzerland, therapists from Japan, all had failed to cure him. $25 million thrown away, he murmured to himself, spinning his chair to the window. The best in the world. The phone rang, interrupting his bitter thoughts. "What is it now, Mrs. Martha?" "Mr. Barnes, there's a child at the gate. Says he came to see you." "A child? What nonsense is this?" "A boy, must be about 8 years old. Says he can help you." Augustus laughed, a harsh sound that expressed no joy. "Send him away." "It's some trick to ask for money." "He insists, sir. Says he has an important message. I don't have time for this." "Call security and—" "He mentioned your condition, sir. Said he knows about your paralysis and that he can cure you." Silence took over the line for a few seconds. Augustus felt a mixture of anger and curiosity. How would a child know about his condition? He had completely isolated himself after the accident, and only his closest circle knew the details of his health. "Bring him to the back veranda. I want to see what kind of charade this is." Mrs. Martha led the small visitor through the mansion's impeccable gardens. The boy looked at everything with curious eyes, but without the awe that would be expected of a child in the face of such luxury. "What's your name?" asked the housekeeper, trying to ease the tense atmosphere. "Matthew." "Matthew Oliver," the boy replied with a serene voice that seemed out of place in someone so young. On the back veranda, overlooking the mountains and the valley below, Augustus waited impatiently. When he saw the boy approaching, he felt a pang of disappointment. He expected some kind of elaborate con artist, not a simple child with brown skin, curly hair, and simple yet clean clothes. "So, you're the miracle boy," he ironized when Matthew stopped before him. "You came to cure the man whom the best doctors in the world couldn't?" "Good afternoon, Mr. Barnes," Matthew said, unfazed. "I'm not a miracle worker. I just see what others can't." Augustus raised his eyebrows, surprised by the boy's articulation. "And what do you see, little genius?" "I see a man who is much more trapped inside than out." The businessman felt his face burn with anger. "How dare you? Who sent you? Was it one of my competitors? Some journalist wanting a story?" Matthew remained calm. "No one sent me, sir. I came because I needed to come." "Where are you from?" "Where are your parents?" "I live in Hopewell Village on the other side of town. My mother works as a nurse at the community health clinic. She doesn't know I'm here." Augustus studied the boy more carefully. There seemed to be no malice in his eyes, only a disturbing serenity. "And how do you intend to cure me, little doctor? Do you have a magic wand hidden in your pocket?" "You gave up before trying," and Matthew said simply, "Trying? Do you have any idea what I tried?" Augustus's voice rose, echoing through the gardens. I spent fortunes, traveled the world, underwent painful experimental treatments. Don't come to me with this cheap self-help talk. They see what's broken, the boy continued as if he hadn't heard the outburst. I see what can be fixed. Augustus felt something strange, a sensation he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't exactly hope, but an unease, as if a long-closed door was being forced open. Go away, boy. I don't have time for this. You have all the time in the world. That's all you've been doing for the past 5 years, passing the time. Mrs. Martha, who was watching the scene from afar, covered her mouth with her hands, expecting her employer's outburst of fury. To her surprise, Augustus merely stared at the boy for long seconds. Come back tomorrow, he finally said, turning his chair to go into the house. If you dare. I'll be here, Matthew replied with a small smile. That night, as he contemplated the city lights below, Augustus couldn't get the simple words of that boy out of his head. So he gave up before trying. The phrase haunted him until dawn, when he finally fell asleep with a question echoing in his mind. What if the best are wrong? If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. The next day dawned cloudy in Aspen Heights, with a fine mist covering the pine trees around Crystal Manor. Augustus had not slept well. Matthew's words reverberated in his head like a persistent echo. Dr. Paul Mitchell, Augustus's private neurologist, arrived early for the weekly visit. He was one of the few who still had access to the businessman, less out of friendship and more for professional convenience. Your exams are stable, Augustus. The physical therapy is maintaining muscle tone, but... The doctor hesitated. But I still can't feel anything from the waist down, Augustus completed bitterly. Any miraculous medical news you want to offer me? The doctor adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable. You know your injury is complex. Science advances, but spare me the speeches of hope. Paul, I've spent millions hearing that. The neurologist put his instruments back in his bag. There's a new experimental treatment in Barcelona. Stem cell therapy combined with deep electrical stimulation. Initial results are promising in cases like yours. Augustus smiled. But it was an empty smile. Let me guess. Astronomical costs, no guarantees, and a waiting list that only makes exceptions for desperate billionaires. Basically, the doctor admitted. Send the documents to my office. I'll review them. After the doctor left, Augustus asked Mrs. Martha to bring his coffee to the veranda. The cold mountain air helped clear his thoughts. He checked his watch. Almost noon. The boy wouldn't show up. Of course he wouldn't come, he murmured to himself. It was just a bad joke. But at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Matthew was at the gate again. This time he carried a worn backpack on his back. Mrs. Martha led him to the veranda, where Augustus awaited him with an expression between irritation and curiosity. I thought you wouldn't come back, the businessman said. I said I'd be here, Matthew replied simply. And what did you bring in that backpack? Magic potions, miracle herbs? The boy opened his backpack and took out a simple notebook, one of those used by public school students. I brought some questions. Augustus laughed, incredulous. Questions? Is that how you intend to cure me? The right questions can change everything, Matthew said, opening the notebook. Mrs. Martha, bring me a coffee and a... What do you want, boy? Milk? Soda? Water is fine, thank you. When the housekeeper left, Augustus leaned back in his chair, staring at the boy. Before your miraculous questions, I have some for you. How did you know about my condition? How did you get my address? Who sent you here? Matthew settled into the chair, still holding the notebook. My mother worked as a nurse in one of your hospitals. She took care of you right after the accident, before she was transferred to the municipal health clinic. And she sent you here? For what? To ask for her job back? No, sir. She doesn't know I'm here, Matthew paused. I dreamed about you. Augustus almost choked on his own saliva. You dreamed about me? That's ridiculous. 3 nights in a row, the boy continued. In the dream, I saw you walking in a garden full of flowers that didn't exist. You weren't in a wheelchair, but you walked slowly as if you were relearning. A shiver ran down Augustus's spine. That was exactly the kind of dream he himself had had in the first months after the accident, before completely losing hope. Nonsense, he murmured, more to himself than to the boy. Coincidences. Mrs. Martha returned with the coffee and water. When she left again, Matthew opened his notebook. My first question, when was the last time you spoke to your legs? Augustus almost spat out his coffee. What? That's absurd. You don't talk to body parts. Oh, why not? They are part of you. They deserve your respect. This is ridiculous. What kind of charlatanism is this? The second question, Matthew continued, ignoring the protest. Have you ever thanked your legs for the years they carried you? Augustus felt his face burn with anger. Enough of this clowning around. You have no idea what you're talking about. I have a spinal cord injury. It's science. It's not something that's solved with imaginary conversations. Science, Matthew repeated as if savoring the word. You believe a lot in science, don't you? Yes, of course I do. It's the only thing you can believe in. Then why hasn't science been able to cure you? The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Augustus opened his mouth to answer, but the words didn't come. That same question had tormented him for 5 years. Science has limitations, yes, he finally said. Some injuries are irreversible. That's reality. Who decides what's irreversible? Matthew asked. The specialists, the studies, the evidence. What if they're only seeing part of the story? Augustus sighed, tired of that game. Look, boy, I appreciate your concern, but I've consulted the best specialists in the world. Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, rehabilitation centers in Switzerland and Japan. I've spent more money on treatments than you'll see in your entire life. Matthew closed his notebook. You visited impressive places. But have you looked inside? Cheap philosophy isn't going to make me walk again, Augustus retorted. Nor the millions you spent, Matthew replied calmly. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. In the distance, thunder announced an approaching storm. You'd better go before the rain starts, Augustus finally said. Your mother must be worried. Matthew put his notebook back in his backpack and stood up. Can I come back tomorrow? Augustus wanted to say no. He wanted to send that boy away and never see him again, but something inside him, something he thought had been dead for years, stopped him. So be it. 3 p.m. Don't make me wait. When the boy was already at the door, Augustus called him. Matthew? Yes, sir? What's your mother's name? The nurse. Louisa Oliver. As soon as the boy left, Augustus called Mrs. Martha. I want you to look in the hospital archives for information about a nurse named Louisa Oliver. She must have worked there about 5 years ago, around the time of my accident. That night, as the storm battered the mountains, Augustus tossed and turned in bed, restless. Matthew's questions, however absurd they seemed, had touched something deep. When was the last time you spoke to your legs? What a stupid question. And yet. He sat up in bed, looking at his motionless legs under the sheet. He felt ridiculous, but still, in an almost inaudible whisper, he said, Are you... There. Silence was his only answer. But for the first time in a long time, Augustus didn't just feel anger when looking at his condition. He felt something different. Something that, if he weren't so skeptical, he might call a glimmer of hope. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Mrs. Martha. Found Louisa Oliver's file. Worked in the rehabilitation wing for 3 years. Fired 2 years ago when we closed that unit. Excellent professional record. Augustus put the phone aside and looked at his legs again. What if the best are wrong? The question echoed in his mind as the rain continued to fall outside. The next morning brought a clear sky after the storm. Augustus woke earlier than usual, a strange restlessness running through his veins. He ordered Mrs. Martha to prepare a full breakfast and for his chauffeur to be ready to take him to the administrative headquarters of his hospitals in New York City. But, sir, you haven't left the mansion in months. The housekeeper protested, surprised. Exactly why? Mrs. Martha, it's time to check some things personally. On the way to New York City, Augustus remained silent, watching the mountain landscape gradually give way to the urban gray of the metropolitan capital. His chauffeur Carl occasionally cast curious glances in the rearview mirror, clearly surprised by his employer's sudden change in routine. The headquarters of Barnes Hospitals occupied an entire skyscraper on Fifth Avenue. When Augustus's motorized wheelchair crossed the main lobby, employees stopped what they were doing, gaping. Many had never seen the owner of the empire in person. Mr. Barnes, exclaimed Regina Hamilton, executive director, quickly rising from her chair when Augustus entered her office without warning. "We weren't expecting your visit. If we had known, we would have prepared a proper reception." "I didn't come for receptions, Regina. I need access to employee files from the rehabilitation wing 5 years ago. Specifically, I want everything about Louisa Oliver." The executive blinked a few times, confused. "Louisa Oliver? I don't recall that name, sir. She was a nurse. She worked during my initial rehabilitation." Regina nodded, typing quickly on her computer. "Ah, yes. Here it is. Head nurse of the Neurological Rehabilitation Wing. Excellent evaluations. She hesitated, looking uncomfortably at her boss. "She was what, Regina?" Augustus insisted. "She was transferred to the municipal unit after the rehabilitation wing closed." "Sir, a closure I ordered," Augustus completed coldly. Regina merely nodded, avoiding his eyes. "I want to speak with her today." "Sir, I don't know if that's possible. She no longer works for us and—" "That wasn't a request, Regina. Locate her and schedule a meeting for this afternoon. Use whatever resources you need." 3 hours later, Augustus waited in a private conference room. The door opened, and a woman of approximately 45 years old entered. Curly hair tied in a bun, brown skin, brown eyes that conveyed a mixture of kindness and determination. It was easy to see where Matthew had inherited his features. "Mr. Barnes," when she greeted him formally, without extending her hand. "Miss Oliver, thank you for coming on such short notice." Louisa sat in the indicated chair, maintaining an upright professional posture. "I confess I was surprised by the invitation. Or should I say summons?" Augustus ignored the provocation. "Your son has been visiting me." The surprise in Louisa's eyes was genuine. "Matthew, visiting you? That's not possible. For the past 2 days. He shows up at my house saying he can help me." Louisa covered her mouth with her hand, clearly shocked. "I didn't know. He didn't tell me anything. Mr. Barnes, I apologize. Matthew is just a child. I don't know how he found out where you live or why he's doing this, but he said he dreamed about me," Augustus interrupted. "Said his mother took care of me after the accident." Louisa's face softened a little. "It's true. I was your head nurse during the first few months, before you completely isolated yourself and closed the rehabilitation wing." "A business decision," Augustus justified dryly. "A personal decision," Louisa corrected, with a boldness that surprised the businessman. "You gave up on yourself and, in doing so, deprived hundreds of patients of treatments that could help them." Augustus felt the blood rush to his face. "I didn't call you here to be judged." "Ms. Oliver, then why did you call me?" she asked, holding his gaze. "I want to understand your son. What does he intend with these visits? Is it some kind of revenge for the wing's closure? Or perhaps an attempt to get money?" Louisa stood up, indignant. "My son is an extraordinary child, Mr. Barnes, sensitive in a way few adults can understand. If he is visiting you, believe me, it's not for money or revenge." She paused, taking a deep breath to calm herself. "Matthew has always had a different perception of things. Doctors say he has high sensitivity. I say he sees with his heart. That doesn't explain why he thinks he can cure me." Louisa sighed, sitting down again. "When you were my patient, Matthew was only 3 years old. Sometimes I would bring him to the hospital when I had no one to leave him with. He saw you once, briefly. You probably didn't even notice you were sedated after one of the surgeries." Augustus tried to remember, but that period was a blur of pain and medication. "So what?" "That day, Matthew asked me why the man in the bed was so sad inside. Not outside where everyone could see, but inside where no one looked. He was 3 years old, Mr. Barnes." An uncomfortable silence hung between them. "Your son needs professional help," Augustus finally said. Louisa smiled, but there was no humor in her smile. "Perhaps it's you who needs it. Not more doctors, but someone who sees beyond tests and diagnoses. Are you suggesting your 8-year-old son has some mystical gift?" Augustus scoffed. "I'm suggesting there are many forms of healing, Mr. Barnes, and that medicine, with all its advancements, is still crawling when it comes to understanding the connection between mind and body." Augustus adjusted in his chair, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I want you to stop your son from visiting me. He is a minor and is traveling alone to Aspen Heights. That is irresponsible on your part. I didn't know about the visits until now, Louisa replied. And yes, I will talk to him, but I can't promise he will obey. Matthew has always been determined. How is he? Getting to my house? It's more than a 2-hour drive. Louisa frowned, worried. I don't know. He leaves for school in the morning and... Her eyes widened with realization. He's been skipping classes. The school called me yesterday, but I thought it was just a rebellious phase. Augustus felt a pang of guilt. If he appears again, I'll have my chauffeur take him back. Louisa nodded, getting up to leave. Mr. Barnes, may I ask a personal question? He made a reluctant gesture of assent. What did Matthew say to you that disturbed you so much that you came all the way to New York City to look for me? Augustus looked away. He asked questions. About talking to my legs, thanking them. Childish nonsense. Louisa smiled, a genuine smile this time. You know, part of my advanced nursing training included integrative techniques. We learned that patients who visualize healing, who talk to their bodies, who thank even the parts that no longer work, have significantly better results. Maybe it's not childish nonsense after all. When she left, Augustus remained motionless, absorbing her words. Something was beginning to change within him, a small crack in the wall of skepticism he had built around himself. Back at the mansion in the late afternoon, Augustus discovered that Matthew had been there. Mrs. Martha informed him that the boy had waited for over an hour and had left a message written on a piece of paper. Healing begins when we accept that we need to be healed. Tomorrow I will return with a proposal. Matthew. Augustus crumpled the paper, irritated, but instead of throwing it away, he put it in his shirt pocket. That night, after much hesitation, he did something he hadn't done in years. He asked his assistants to research alternative therapies and integrative approaches for spinal cord injuries. The old Augustus would have laughed at such pseudoscience, but now a small voice in his mind asked, what if there's more beyond what science has already proven? Morning arrived with a dense fog covering the mansion, common at that time of year in Aspen Heights. Augustus had slept poorly, tormented by dreams in which he sometimes walked freely through the gardens, sometimes sank into a swamp that pulled him deeper and deeper down. Dr. Paul Mitchell arrived for his visit, carrying a folder with the latest exams. You look tired. Augustus, the doctor commented as he took his blood pressure. Bad nights. The businessman replied dryly. The Barcelona reports have arrived. The new stem cell treatment, I'm not interested, Augustus interrupted. Dr. Paul stopped mid-movement, surprised. What do you mean? You always wanted to try every available treatment, no matter how experimental. Augustus observed the doctor with a penetrating gaze. Paul, be honest with me. In your 30 years of neurology, have you ever seen a case like mine where the patient walked again? The doctor hesitated, uncomfortable. Each case is unique, Augustus. There are reports in the literature of partial recoveries in similar injuries, especially with early intervention, and that doesn't answer my question. Augustus cut him off. In your personal experience, cases you followed, not statistics or scientific articles. Dr. Paul sighed, defeated. No, not personally. But that doesn't mean... What do you think of alternative therapies? Augustus asked abruptly. Visualization, meditation, that sort of thing. The doctor stared at him as if he had grown a second head. Augustus Barnes asking about alternative therapies. What happened to, if it's not proven by double-blind studies, it's useless? Just answer the question. Dr. Paul thought for a moment before speaking. There is growing evidence that integrative approaches can complement conventional treatments. Not replace them, but enhance their effects. Neuroplasticity is influenced by factors beyond medication and physical therapy. Why didn't you ever mention this before? Because you ridiculed any mention of treatments that weren't purely scientific, the doctor replied frankly. You were always extremely skeptical. Augustus reflected on the doctor's words, remembering how many times he had dismissed suggestions with disdain. I want you to cancel my physical therapy today, and don't come back until next week. Augustus, I don't think it's wise to interrupt. I'm not asking for your opinion, the businessman cut him off. I need a few days alone. When the doctor left, visibly annoyed, Augustus called Mrs. Martha. I want all employees to take 3 days off. All, sir? The housekeeper asked, perplexed. All. Cooks, gardeners, security guards, cleaners, everyone, leave food ready in the fridge. I want the house completely empty by 2 p.m. But sir, you've never been alone since I became paralyzed, Augustus completed harshly. It's time to change that, don't you think? Mrs. Martha, who knew her employer's temperament well, did not insist. What if that boy shows up today? Let him in before you leave, Augustus replied, surprising the housekeeper even more. When the clock struck 2 in the afternoon, the mansion was silent as never before. The 23 employees who kept the property running had left, many of them confused and worried about their employer's strange behavior. At 3 o'clock, the intercom rang. It was the security guard at the main gate, the only one Augustus had allowed to stay for obvious security reasons. Mr. Barnes, the boy is here again. Let him in, and then you leave too. Just close the outer gate. Minutes later, Matthew walked across the garden towards the house. This time, in addition to his backpack, he carried a small wooden box in his hands. Augustus waited for him at the mansion entrance. "Does your mother know you're here?" he asked as soon as the boy approached. Matthew seemed surprised. "You spoke with her?" "Yesterday. She was worried about you skipping school to come here. I was going to tell her today," Matthew replied, a little embarrassed. "But I wanted to wait for the right moment." Augustus spun his chair, indicating for the boy to follow him inside the house. "What's in that box?" "My proposal," Matthew replied simply. They entered a spacious living room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the mountains. Augustus indicated a sofa for the boy to sit on. "Where are all the employees?" Matthew asked, noticing the unusual silence. "I gave everyone 3 days off." The boy raised his eyebrows, surprised. "Why?" "Let's say your proposal made me curious. What do you have there?" Matthew placed the wooden box on the coffee table. It was a simple, unadorned box that looked handmade. "Before opening it, I need to explain something," the boy said with a seriousness that did not match his age. "You believe in science. I respect that. Science explains many things, makes planes fly, cures diseases, creates computers." "What are you getting at?" Augustus interrupted, impatient. "Science is wonderful for understanding what's broken in the body, but there are breaks that don't show up on exams. Wounds that no machine can see. Are you talking about psychological issues? I've had therapy, you know. In the first 2 years after the accident. I'm not talking about the mind or the body separately," Matthew continued. "I'm talking about the connection between them. The invisible space where one influences the other." Augustus sighed. "Matthew, I appreciate your philosophy, but I have a spinal cord injury. Concrete, real, visible on any MRI. What if that injury was just the beginning of the story, not the end?" the boy asked, finally opening the box. Inside it were only 3 objects, a small, smooth white stone, a candle, and an even smaller notebook than the previous one. "Is that it?" Augustus asked with a hint of disappointment. "Your miracle proposal is a stone and a candle." "My proposal is simple," Matthew said, ignoring the sarcasm. 3 days. Are you and I here in this house, following a program I created to reconnect you with your legs?" Augustus laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. "Reconnect? My spinal cord is injured, boy. It's not a matter of spiritual reconnection. How do you know?" Matthew asked with genuine curiosity. "Have you tried?" "Don't be ridiculous." "Of course I haven't tried." "That makes no scientific sense whatsoever." "Then how can you be sure it doesn't work?" The simple question left Augustus without an immediate answer. It was true that he had dismissed any unconventional approach without even considering it. "What exactly do you propose?" he finally asked, feeling absurd for taking it seriously. Matthew took the small notebook from the box and opened it. Day 1. Recognition. You will recognize your legs as part of yourself again, not as broken objects. And how will I do that? By talking to them, thanking them for the years they carried you, asking forgiveness for having emotionally abandoned them. Augustus felt his face burn with embarrassment. That's childish. The second day is dedicated to memory. Matthew continued, ignoring the objection. You will remember what it was like to walk, run, feel the ground beneath your feet. You will visualize each movement in detail. I did that in the first few months after the accident. It didn't change anything. Did you do it as a medical exercise or as an emotional reconnection? Again, Augustus was left without an answer. The third day is for the healing itself, Matthew said, closing the notebook. But I can only explain it when we get there. Augustus stared at the boy for long seconds. A part of him wanted to laugh at it all, send the boy away, and resume his routine of expensive and ineffective treatments. Another part, however, a part he thought had long been dead, was curious, perhaps even hopeful. "Why do you care?" he finally asked. "Why are you doing this?" Matthew thought before answering. "When I was 3, I saw you in the hospital. I remember asking my mother why the man in the bed was so sad inside. She was surprised and said I had a special sensitivity. Since then, I dream about people who need help. Most I don't know, never seen before. But I recognized you. In your dreams, do I walk again?" "In my dreams, you free yourself," Matthew replied. "Walking is just a consequence." Augustus shook his head, still incredulous but increasingly intrigued. What if it doesn't work? What if after these 3 days I'm exactly as I am? "Then you will be sure that you tried everything." "Absolutely everything. Isn't that what you want?" The question hit Augustus like a punch. It was exactly what he wanted, the certainty that he had tried every possibility, no matter how absurd they seemed. "My mother knows where I am now," Matthew added. "I called her before I came. She's not happy, but she understands that I need to do this. Letting an 8-year-old boy sleep in a stranger's house for 3 days? That's crazy. We're not strangers," Matthew replied simply. "And my mother will pick me up on Sunday." Augustus looked out the window, watching the sun begin to set behind the mountains. This was absurd, irrational, totally contrary to everything he believed in. "And yet, 3 days, he finally said. "Not a minute more. And if I decide to stop at any moment, you will leave without protest." Matthew smiled, the first genuine smile Augustus had seen on the boy's face. "Agreed." As night fell over the Blue Ridge Mountains, Crystal Manor was silent as never before. In one of the guest rooms, Matthew slept peacefully. Downstairs, alone in his adapted room, Augustus stared at the ceiling, wondering what madness he had gotten himself into. This is complete nonsense, he thought, and yet he couldn't ignore the small flame of hope that was beginning to ignite in his chest. The first ray of morning sun found Augustus already awake. He hadn't slept more than a few hours, his mind oscillating between skepticism and a strange expectation. He dressed alone, a skill hard won in the first years of paralysis, and drove his motorized chair to the kitchen. To his surprise, Matthew was already there, preparing what looked like a simple breakfast. "Good morning." "Mr. Barnes," the boy greeted him. "I hope you don't mind. I found bread and fruit in the fridge." "You know how to cook?" Augustus asked, watching the boy move deftly around the gigantic kitchen. "My mother works long shifts. I learned to manage," Matthew replied naturally. "Do you like coffee?" "Black, no sugar." They had coffee in a strange but not entirely uncomfortable silence. Augustus observed the boy, still trying to understand how an 8-year-old could be so self-assured. "And now?" he finally asked. "How do we start your program?" Matthew wiped his mouth with a napkin and stood up. "First, we need to go to a special place in the house. A place that has meaning for you." Augustus thought for a moment. "My office, perhaps? It's where I spend most of my time." "No," Matthew shook his head. "A place that connects you with who you were before. A place that brings good memories." Augustus hesitated. There was such a place, but he had avoided going there for years. "The music room," he finally said. "On the 3rd floor? Does the mansion have an elevator?" "Yes, I had it installed after the accident." Minutes later, they were in a large room with high windows. A grand piano occupied the center of the space, covered by a velvet cloth. On the walls, violins and other instruments hung like works of art. "Do you play?" Matthew asked, amazed. "I did," Augustus corrected. "Piano and violin. Since I was 5. Why did you stop?" Augustus looked at his hands, then at his motionless legs. "I couldn't use the piano pedals anymore. And sitting properly for the violin became complicated. But your hands are perfect," Matthew observed. "The music wasn't there anymore," Augustus replied dryly. Matthew nodded, as if he understood perfectly. "This is the perfect place. Music is connection. We can begin." The boy took the small notebook and the white stone Augustus had seen the night before from his backpack. "First, I need you to hold this stone knight," he said, handing it to the businessman. Augustus took the object, feeling its smooth, cold surface. What is this? Some magic crystal? He asked ironically. It's just a common stone I found in the river near my house, Matthew replied simply. But today it will represent everything you feel about your condition. All the anger, frustration, bitterness. Hold it tight. Augustus squeezed the stone in his hand, feeling ridiculous. Now I'm going to ask some questions. You don't need to answer aloud. Just think about the answers. Matthew opened his notebook. When was the last time you felt gratitude for your body? The question caught Augustus by surprise. Gratitude? For a body that had betrayed him? Before talking about your legs, we need to talk about you as a whole, Matthew continued. You still breathe, your heart beats, your lungs work, your arms and hands are strong. How long have you only thought about what doesn't work, instead of what still works perfectly? Augustus felt a lump form in his throat. It was true. In the last 5 years, he had reduced his entire identity to paralysis. Close your eyes. Please, Matthew asked. Augustus obeyed, still holding the stone tightly. Now, imagine you can talk to every part of your body. Start by thanking your heart for beating non-stop, even when you gave up on living fully. The businessman almost opened his eyes, bothered by the childish exercise, but something made him continue. Thank your lungs for breathing, your hands for still creating, your eyes for seeing the beauty of the world. Augustus felt a strange emotion growing in his chest. It was absurd but somehow comforting. Now we come to your legs, as Matthew's voice was calm, almost hypnotic. Don't think of them as broken or useless. Think of them as parts of you that suffered trauma, just as your heart suffered. My heart? Augustus couldn't help but ask. Yes, the trauma wasn't just physical, was it? There was emotional trauma too. You didn't just lose the movement of your legs. You lost dreams, you lost freedom, you lost music. Augustus felt something warm stream down his face. A tear. He hadn't cried in years. Now, I want you to talk to your legs aloud. This is ridiculous, Augustus protested, opening his eyes. More ridiculous than spending millions on treatments that didn't work. Matthew asked calmly. Augustus closed his eyes again, took a deep breath. What should I say? What would you say to a friend who is suffering? Start by apologizing for having emotionally abandoned them. Augustus felt the absurdity of the situation, but something within him, that small flame of hope, made him continue. I'm sorry, he murmured, feeling foolish. Sorry for giving up on you. Continue, Matthew encouraged. You carried me for 53 years. You took me to incredible places. You allowed me to dance, run, swim. And when you needed me, I gave up. I focused only on what was wrong, never on what we could still do together. The words came out more easily now, as if a dam had broken. Augustus spoke for several minutes, his voice alternating between whispers and firmer sentences. When he finally stopped, his face was wet with tears. Now open your hands, Matthew instructed. The white stone was warm, almost burning against his palm. This stone carried your words. Words have power, Mr. Barnes. Not the magical power of fairy tales, but the power to change how we feel, how we think, how we relate to our own bodies. The rest of the day followed a similar pattern. Visualization exercises, conversations about past traumas, moments of contemplative silence. To Augustus's surprise, time passed quickly. When night came, he was emotionally exhausted, but he felt something different, a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. We'll continue tomorrow, Matthew said as they said goodnight. You were very brave today. Brave. No one had called Augustus Barnes brave in a long time. The second day dawned rainy. Augustus woke up feeling pains he hadn't noticed before. Not physical pains, but emotional ones. As if long atrophied muscles of the soul were being stretched again. Matthew suggested they spend the day in the library, another place Augustus rarely visited since the accident. There, among thousands of books, the businessman had spent many hours of his youth. Today we're going to work with memory, Matthew explained. You're going to reconnect with the sensation of walking. How can I remember something I haven't felt for 5 years? The body forgets, but the brain doesn't, the boy replied. You walked for over 50 years. Those memories are stored somewhere. They spent hours on detailed visualization exercises. Augustus had to describe the exact sensation of his feet touching the ground, the weight of his body alternating between one leg and the other, the swing of his arms while walking. At first, the descriptions were mechanical, distant. But gradually, with Matthew's patient guidance, they became vivid, emotional. "Your brain still knows how to walk," Matthew said late in the afternoon. "We need to make your body remember too." That night, Augustus dreamed he was walking on the beach. It wasn't a hazy dream, but vivid, detailed. He could feel the sand between his toes, the salty wind, the balance of his body. When he woke up, there was a remnant of that sensation, like a distant echo. The third day arrived with bright sunshine after the rain. Matthew found Augustus on the veranda observing the garden. "How do you feel?" the boy asked. "Different," Augustus replied after a moment of reflection. "I can't explain exactly. Today is the most important day," Matthew said, sitting beside him. "Today we will attempt the healing itself." Augustus nodded, a part of him still skeptical, but another part strangely open to the possibility. "What will we do?" "Let's go to the garden." In the middle of the impeccable garden, Matthew asked Augustus to stop his chair near a small stone bench. "For the past 2 days, we've worked with your mind and your heart," the boy explained. "Today we're going to work with your physical body." "How?" "You're going to try to stand up." Augustus laughed, a bitter laugh. "That's impossible. My legs have no strength at all." "Do you have parallel bars in the physical therapy room?" "Yes, but can we use them?" Minutes later, they were in the mansion's modern physical therapy room. Expensive, state-of-the-art equipment occupied the space, many of them with imported labels still visible. Matthew adjusted the parallel bars to the appropriate height for Augustus. "I'll help you get into position." With combined effort, they managed to transfer Augustus from the chair to the start of the bars. His hands gripped the support firmly. "This is useless," Augustus protested. "I've tried this hundreds of times with professional physical therapists, but never after the exercises we did," Matthew replied. "Never after reconnecting mind and body." Augustus sighed but decided to continue. "What should I do?" "First, I want you to close your eyes and visualize your legs healthy again. Remember the sensation of standing, the weight of your body distributed equally, the muscles supporting you." Augustus obeyed, concentrating intensely. "Now, without opening your eyes, ask your legs to support you, not as an order but as a sincere request. Tell them you trust they remember how to do it." Augustus felt ridiculous again, but he murmured the words. "Lastly, I want you to think of a reason strong enough to take the next step. Not because I want to walk, but something deeper." Augustus thought for a long moment. Why did he want to walk again? To prove the doctors were wrong? To regain his independence? None of that seemed sufficient now. And then, like a lightning bolt, the answer came. He wanted to walk again, to live. Not just exist, not just survive, but live fully again. To feel complete. To resume music, walks, the small joys he had abandoned. "Now try to stand up." Matthew's voice sounded distant. Augustus gripped the bars tightly, trying to pull his body up. As expected, his legs remained inert, unable to support his weight. "Don't give up," Matthew encouraged. "You're not trying to prove anything to anyone. You're just talking to your body again." Augustus tried again, concentrating on the sensation of standing he had visualized so intensely. Nothing happened. On the third attempt, something changed. It wasn't a visible movement, but a sensation, a slight tingling as if a dormant limb was beginning to awaken. "I'm feeling something," he whispered, almost afraid. "Keep going." Matthew's voice was full of contained emotion. Augustus closed his eyes again, concentrating on that small sensation, trying to amplify it, extend it. The tingling increased, descending through his right thigh to his knee. "It's working," he murmured, incredulous. With immense effort, he tried again. This time there was movement, small, almost imperceptible, but his right knee had tightened slightly. Tears streamed down Augustus's face now. 5 years of medical certainty crumbling before his eyes. "One more time," Matthew asked. "For the reason you found." Augustus gathered all his concentration, all his will. He imagined himself standing, playing the piano again, walking in the garden, dancing, living. And then the impossible happened. His right leg trembled, then stiffened slightly. With superhuman effort, Augustus managed to transfer a small part of his weight to it. He wasn't standing, not completely, but for the first time in 5 years, his leg was supporting a fraction of his weight. "Matthew," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "It's—" The boy was by his side, tears also in his eyes. "Keep going, Mr. Barnes. You're finding your way back." At that moment, something broke within Augustus. It wasn't just his leg that was awakening, but something much deeper. The wall of bitterness, cynicism, and hopelessness he had built over the years completely collapsed. When Louisa Oliver arrived at the mansion in the late afternoon to pick up her son, she found a scene she would never forget. Augustus Barnes, the man everyone said would never walk again, was standing at the parallel bars, trembling with effort, but undeniably supporting part of his own weight. Beside him, Matthew encouraged him with soft words. "My God," Louisa whispered, bringing her hand to her mouth. Augustus turned his face to her, tears flowing freely. "Your son," he began, but couldn't finish the sentence. "I know," Louisa replied, also crying. "I always knew." 6 months had passed since that extraordinary afternoon at Crystal Manor. Winter had given way to spring, and spring to summer. Now, autumn painted the Blue Ridge Mountains with golden and reddish hues. At the entrance of the newly inaugurated Matthew Oliver Integrative Rehabilitation Center, a line of people patiently awaited the opening ceremony. Patients in wheelchairs, on crutches, and their families had traveled from various parts of the United States to be there that day. Some had read about Augustus's story in magazines and newspapers. Others had been referred by doctors who, despite initial skepticism, were beginning to recognize that something extraordinary was happening. On the stage set up in the center's gardens, Mrs. Martha nervously adjusted the microphone, checking that everything was perfect for the inaugural speech. Beside her, Mr. Josiah, the gardener who had been reinstated with honors and a generous salary increase, ensured that the flowers of the central arrangement were impeccable. He was not the only employee Augustus had won back. An entire team of former employees, unjustly dismissed during his years of bitterness, now worked for him again, but under very different conditions, with fair wages, family health insurance, and participation in the center's decisions. Backstage, Louisa Oliver, now the center's director of nursing, checked the last details of the program. She had brought with her a team of dedicated nurses from the community health clinic, all now trained in conventional and integrative techniques. "We're 5 minutes late," she commented, checking her watch. "He'll show up," Dr. Paul Mitchell replied, who had left his lucrative private practice to join the project. "He's probably practicing his steps." As if invoked by the doctor's words, Augustus Barnes appeared at the backstage entrance. He walked slowly, leaning on a cane, each step carefully calculated. His eyes, once cold and distant, now shone with renewed intensity. Beside him, Matthew, now 9 years old, held a small violin case. "Sorry for the delay," Augustus said, smiling. "Someone," he looked at Matthew, "insisted we should stop by the library first." "You forgot your speech," the boy explained, taking a folded paper from his pocket and handing it to Augustus. "As if I could forget what I'm going to say today," the businessman replied, affectionately ruffling the boy's hair. Louisa watched the scene with a serene smile. In recent months, she had witnessed the most extraordinary transformation she had ever seen in a human being. Not just Augustus's partial physical recovery, which surprised and confounded the medical community, but mainly his inner metamorphosis. The man who once fired employees for stepping on the grass now spent hours talking to cleaners and gardeners, genuinely interested in their lives and families. "It's time," she announced, indicating the stage. Augustus took a deep breath and nodded. "Matthew, are you coming with me?" "This moment is yours," the boy replied. "I'll play later, as we agreed." Augustus walked slowly to the center of the stage. Each step was still a challenge, but a challenge he now embraced with renewed determination. When he reached the microphone, a spontaneous round of applause erupted from the audience. He waited patiently for the sound to subside before speaking. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Augustus Barnes, and until 6 months ago I was a man dead inside." A respectful silence fell over the audience. "Doctors told me I would never walk again, that my spinal cord injury was irreversible, that I should accept my new reality and move on. They were right about the injury." He paused significantly. "But they were wrong about what was possible." Augustus looked at the horizon, at the mountains that now meant something completely different to him. "This center we inaugurate today is not just another rehabilitation clinic. It is a place of possibilities, a place where science and humanity work together, where we treat whole people, not just broken bodies, where traditional medicine and integrative approaches walk side by side, without prejudice or artificial barriers. He moved a few steps to the side, without the help of his cane, causing murmurs of admiration in the audience. I'm not here to sell miracles. My recovery is partial and remains a daily effort. There are better days and worse days, but the true miracle is not in my legs. He touched his chest. It's here. Augustus then told the story of how an 8-year-old boy had appeared at his door, claiming he could cure him. How he, a man of science and reason, had ridiculed the idea, and how gradually that boy had demolished his certainties and opened a door he thought was permanently closed. Matthew taught me that healing is not just physical, that our bodies respond to what we feel, think, and believe, not in a magical or supernatural way, but in ways that science is only beginning to understand. He explained how the center would combine advanced medical treatments with integrative approaches, psychology, visualization, meditation, therapy, through art and music. How each patient would be treated in their totality, not just as a set of symptoms or diagnoses. Our team includes doctors, physical therapists, psychologists, occupational therapists, but also specialists in music therapy, art therapy, meditation, and integrative practices. All working together, respecting each other, focused on the same goal, helping people rediscover their possibilities. Augustus paused, looking at the hopeful faces before him. And most importantly, no one will pay for these treatments. The Matthew Oliver Center is and always will be free, financed by the Barnes Foundation. In addition, we will offer temporary housing for families of patients who come from afar, psychological support for caregivers, and professional reintegration. Programs for those who need to restart their lives after trauma or illness. A new wave of applause erupted, more enthusiastic than the first. Augustus waited again before continuing. Many ask me if I believe in miracles now. My answer is, I believe in unexplored possibilities. I believe that the human body and the human mind hold secrets that we have not yet fully deciphered. And I believe that sometimes we need someone who sees beyond apparent limitations to remind us of our own potential. He gestured backstage, and Matthew walked onto the stage carrying his violin. I'd like to conclude with a small performance. Something that seemed impossible just a few months ago. Matthew helped me rediscover music, just as he helped me rediscover hope. The boy positioned himself next to the grand piano that had been brought especially for the occasion. Augustus walked slowly to the instrument and sat on the bench, adjusting it carefully. This piece is called Rebirth, he announced. I composed it during my recovery. Augustus's fingers touched the keys softly, producing a simple and deeply emotional melody. Matthew joined in with his violin, creating a perfect harmony. The music spoke of pain, acceptance, and finally renewal. When the last chord sounded, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. After the official ceremony, while guests explored the center's facilities, Augustus found a moment to be alone with Matthew. I have a gift for you, he said, handing the boy an envelope. Matthew opened it carefully. Inside was a deed. What is this? The property next to your mother's house. I had a new house built for you. I know your mother wouldn't accept money directly, but I hope she accepts this. The boy's eyes widened. This is too much, Mr. Barnes. I'd call me Augustus, I told you. And no, it's not too much. It's the least I can do. Matthew folded the paper carefully and returned it to the envelope. Thank you, but I cannot accept. It was Augustus's turn to be surprised. Why? Your mother works too much. You live in too small a house. And we are happy that way. Matthew completed with a serene smile. You have already given the best gift you could give. And what would that be? You used your second chance to help others. You created this place. You are changing lives. Augustus felt his eyes well up again. This boy continued to surprise him. At least accept a scholarship for any university you want in the future. Matthew considered for a moment. That I can accept. I want to study medicine and psychology too. Augustus laughed. Both degrees. Why am I not surprised? That night, after all the guests had left, Augustus sat on the veranda of his mansion, watching the lights of the new center shine in the valley below. A nurse accompanied him, but kept a respectful distance. Doctors had insisted that he not be completely alone, although his independence grew each week. His phone rang. It was Regina Hamilton, his executive director. Investors are concerned, Augustus. Barnes Hospital's shares fell 2% today. They question the allocation of so many resources to a free center. They say it's not a sustainable business model, and they're especially nervous about your decision to transform the premium wing of the New York City Hospital into a free treatment center for public health system patients. Augustus smiled. Tell them we've redefined what sustainability means, that profits will now be measured not just in money, but in transformed lives, and that the financial reports from the last quarters clearly show that the new employment policies we implemented, with fairer wages and profit sharing, increased productivity and reduced staff turnover. In the end, this more than compensates for the social investments. That won't calm the shareholders. Then tell them I expect all of them for lunch here at the mansion next Saturday. I want them to see the center personally, to see what we are building, to talk to the patients and their families, and also tell them that whoever wants to sell their shares, my foundation is ready to buy them at market value. After hanging up, Augustus stood up carefully. His steps were still unsteady, but each day brought small improvements. Doctors still didn't fully understand what had happened. Some spoke of spontaneous remission, others of an extraordinarily potent placebo effect, still others of a typical neural regeneration stimulated by psychological factors. A team from UCLA had requested permission to study his case and develop an experimental protocol based on his experience. Augustus knew it was something more, something that science perhaps didn't yet have adequate words to describe. It wasn't just about him or his specific condition. It was about expanding the definition of what is possible when we combine scientific knowledge, human connection, and open-mindedness. In the mansion's garden, now redesigned to be fully accessible, Augustus found Matthew sitting on a stone bench watching the stars. "Shouldn't you be asleep?" he asked, carefully sitting beside the boy. "I was thinking," Matthew replied, "about the future. And what do you see there? More people like you, people who have learned to see beyond apparent limits." In the room that had been Matthew's during those 3 transformative days, now converted into a small personal sanctuary, Augustus picked up the small white stone the boy had left for him. It lay on a simple table, along with the notebook of questions and a photo of the two at the piano. "Thank you," Augustus whispered, not just to the stone, but to everything it represented. A year later, the Matthew Oliver Integrative Rehabilitation Center had become a national benchmark. Patients who had lost hope found there not only cutting-edge treatments but something equally important, a renewed belief in their own possibilities. The media, initially skeptical, now regularly published stories of surprising recoveries. Doctors from all over the country visited the center to learn about the integrative approach. The model had expanded. 3 new centers had been inaugurated in different regions of the United States, one in the Southeast, another in the Midwest, and a third in the Pacific Northwest, bringing the methodology to communities that rarely had access to specialized treatments. Augustus's hospital network, once known for its exclusivity and exorbitant prices, now stood out for its policy of humanized care for all, with free wings in each unit. Augustus continued his own journey of recovery, with advances and setbacks. Some days he could walk for almost an hour without his cane. Others he needed the wheelchair again, but that no longer mattered. He had understood that the true paralysis was not in his legs, but had been in his heart. Matthew continued to visit him regularly. The boy grew, but maintained that peculiar serenity, that wisdom that seemed to come from another place. On a particularly beautiful afternoon, as they played together in the music room, Augustus asked the question that had intrigued him for months. "How did you know, Matthew? How did you know it was possible?" The boy lowered his violin and thought for a moment. "I didn't know, Mr. Augustus. I just believed. And sometimes believing is the first step to making the impossible possible. Augustus nodded, finally understanding. The question that had changed his life remained relevant, not just for him, but for everyone who passed through the center. What if the best are wrong? That doubt, planted by an 8-year-old boy, had transformed into the greatest strength of his life. A strength he now shared with the world. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Augustus and Matthew's journey has touched your hearts. To continue experiencing stories of overcoming and transformation like this, we have a special playlist, American Rebirths, that you can find by clicking here. If this narrative awakened something in you, be sure to subscribe to the channel, share with those who need to hear this message of hope, and leave your like. Every day we bring new stories that explore life's extraordinary possibilities. We await you in the comments to know which moments touched your soul the most. See you in the next story.